Welcome to Thalira Tales, where stories bloom in silence, carrying emotion, mystery, and hidden truth. Step in and let the tale unfold.
On our first wedding anniversary, my husband smiled, kissed my forehead, and stepped away to take a business call. Seconds later, a stranger in a gray uniform pressed a black keycard into my palm and whispered, "Don't touch the wine. Don't go back to your room. He's watching everything. Run." I had 3 seconds to choose trust the man I loved or trust a total stranger. I ran, and from the 14th floor above, I heard the crash. That was the night I understood the man who had been pouring my wine was counting down my final days. Before we go any further, thank you for being here. It means more than you know. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from, your country, your city. I love knowing who is on the other side of the screen. Note this story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and education. Any resemblance to names or places is coincidental, but the message inside is worth keeping. The restaurant at the Obsidian Resort smelled like winter roses and old money, and I remember thinking, as Julian reached across the white linen tablecloth to refill my glass, that I had never been this happy in my entire 29 years of life. "You're staring again," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. His eyes caught the candlelight and held it like something precious. "You've been staring at me all evening, Brianna. Can you blame me?" I laughed, and the sound surprised me, light, completely unguarded, nothing like the careful woman I had spent years becoming. "You're extraordinarily handsome when you're being charming." Julian pressed his hand over his heart in mock offense. "Only when I'm being charming. Especially then." He laughed, and the warmth of it rolled through my chest, like the first sip of something expensive. 1 year. Tonight marked exactly 1 year since we had stood in a garden in Nantucket and promised ourselves to each other under a white archway draped in jasmine. 1 year of waking up beside him, of learning the rhythm of a life built for two. The Obsidian Resort glittered around us. Newport, Rhode Island in December was the kind of beautiful that made you forget the rest of the world existed. The Atlantic crashed against the cliffs somewhere outside. A jazz quartet played something slow and golden across the room. Julian had arranged everything. He always arranged everything perfectly. "I spoke to your father today," Julian said, swirling his Chateau Margaux with practiced ease before pouring my glass first. He always poured my glass first. Every dinner, every evening without exception for the past 3 months. "He called to wish us a happy anniversary. He sounds strong, Brianna." My heart squeezed with so much warmth it almost hurt. "He adores you," I said. "He told me last week that I finally made a smart decision in my life." I laughed and reached across to squeeze Julian's hand. "His words, not mine. I'll have to thank him properly." Julian turned my hand over in his, running his thumb across my knuckles in slow, deliberate circles. "He raised a remarkable woman." Heat rushed to my cheeks, and I looked down at my wine glass. The Margot was a deep, gorgeous red. I should have taken a sip. I always did. And every single time I had sunk into the deepest, strangest sleep within the hour, waking heavy-headed and slow as though the night had been stolen from me. I had blamed the long work weeks. I reached for the glass, then set it down again. Some instinct I could not name made my hands stop. "Tell me something," I said softly. "Something I don't know about you yet." Julian tilted his head, and something moved across the back of his eyes, quick and unreadable, like a light switching off in a room down the hall. Then he smiled wide, and certain the smile I had fallen in love with. "I think about the future constantly," he said. "About what we're building together. I want everything for you, Brianna." He paused, and his voice dropped lower. "Everything." The words wrapped around me like a promise. Then his phone buzzed against the tablecloth. Julian glanced down, and for the space of one heartbeat his jaw tightened. Then it was gone, replaced by his easy smile. He straightened his jacket, adjusted one of his monogrammed gold-white cufflinks. "Shipping partners," he said lightly. "They just docked. Give me 2 minutes, sweetheart." He leaned down and pressed his lips to my forehead, warm and unhurried, as though we had all the time in the world. "Order us dessert." He walked away through the candlelit room. I watched him go, still smiling, still warm, still completely catastrophically unaware. Then the woman appeared. She wore the resort's staff uniform, gray silk, perfectly pressed, a white gardenia pinned at her collar. She carried a folded warm towel on a silver tray. She bent toward me with a deferential nod extending the cloth. But the moment the tray blocked the room's sightline, her fingers snapped around my wrist like a steel cuff. I gasped out loud. "Don't touch the wine!" She breathed against my ear, her voice shaking so violently I felt it against my skin. "Don't go back to your room. He's watching everything. Run. The service elevator behind the spa. Take it to the laundry level. Right now." Her grip tightened until my fingers went white. Right now. She pressed something cold and hard into my palm beneath the towel. A keycard, matte black. Then she straightened, smiled pleasantly at the room as though she had only delivered a warm cloth, and walked away without looking back. I sat there with the keycard hidden in my fist, my heart slamming against my ribs so violently, I pressed my free hand flat against my chest just to feel it. The wine glass sat full and untouched in front of me. Above me, somewhere on the 14th floor, the walls shook. A sound like the world ending, a door blown completely off its hinges. The keycard burned cold against my palm. I sat absolutely still at that beautiful table surrounded by candlelight and jazz, and the soft murmur of people who had no idea what I had just heard, what I was holding, what was crumbling around me in real time. My chest felt like something inside it had cracked straight down the middle. My lungs refused to work properly. I pressed my hand flat against the table to stop the trembling, but the trembling only moved up my arm and into my shoulders. "Think, Brianna, think." I forced my eyes up from the tablecloth and looked out across the restaurant. That was when I saw them. Two men stood at the entrance to the dining room. They wore dark suits that were slightly too stiff, slightly too uniform, nothing like the relaxed linen blazers of the other guests. They were not looking at the menu. They were not signaling a waiter. They stood perfectly still at the edge of the candlelight, and their eyes were moving slow, methodical, sweeping the room in a pattern I recognized from somewhere I could not immediately place. Then one of them turned his gaze directly to me, and I recognized his face. My throat closed completely. That was Daniel Carr, Julian's personal security detail. The man Julian had casually mentioned 3 weeks ago had taken an extended leave of absence for a family matter. The man who was absolutely not supposed to be standing 40 feet from my dinner table on our wedding anniversary, staring at me with eyes that held nothing warm in them at all. Every single nerve ending in my body fired at once. "No," I whispered to myself so quietly it did not even qualify as sound. "No, no, no." My mind raced backward through the last 3 months with sudden nauseating clarity. Every dinner Julian had insisted on ordering for us both. Every glass of wine he had poured himself, always mine first, always with that warm, practiced smile. Every morning, I had woken feeling thick and slow, my dreams gone. My whole body weighted, like something had been taken from me while I slept. I had thought it was exhaustion from long work weeks. I had thought it was happiness, the kind that makes you sleep deeply. My hands began to shake so badly I had to press them beneath the table. The woman's words tore through my mind again. "Don't touch the wine." And I looked at my glass, at that beautiful, expensive, untouched Margot, and I understood with a cold certainty that rearranged everything I thought I knew about the last year of my life. Daniel Carr took one step in my direction. I stood up. I did not run. Running would have been an invitation. I gathered my clutch from the table with fingers that barely obeyed me, pushed my chair back with a steadiness that cost me everything, and walked toward the corridor marked with a small brass plaque, "Powder Room." My heels clicked against the marble floor. I counted each step. 1, 2, 3. My pulse was so loud in my ears it drowned out the jazz quartet entirely. The moment I turned the corner and the dining room disappeared behind me, I broke into a sprint. I hit the powder room door with both hands and burst inside, gasping. The room was empty, cream marble, gilded mirrors, the smell of gardenias. I caught my reflection and barely recognized myself. My eyes were enormous. My face had gone the color of chalk. I pressed both hands against the cool marble of the sink and forced myself to breathe. "You are not going to fall apart," I said to my reflection, and my voice cracked on the last word. I pressed my lips together hard. "Not yet. Not here." I needed chaos. I needed people moving and doors opening and attention pulling in every direction except toward me. I dug through my clutch and found my lipstick, a deep burgundy that cost more than my first car. I uncapped it, stepped to the mirror, and wrote in letters large enough to be read from the doorway, "Fire on floor 3, evacuate now." Then I crossed to the small red panel. Mounted beside the door, pulled off my shoe, and drove the heel into the protective cover. It cracked on the second blow. I reached in with a trembling hand, found the alarm handle, and pulled. The sound that exploded through the room was physical, a shrieking, wailing scream of noise that hit me like a wall and kept hitting. My ears rang, my vision blurred. From somewhere above the ceiling came the hiss of the sprinkler system engaging in the corridor. I dropped my phone into the trash bin beside the sink without looking at it. Julian had been tracking it. I was certain of that now, with the same certainty I had once been certain he loved me, and the difference between those two certainties made my eyes burn with tears I absolutely refused to shed. Not yet. The keycard. I pressed it against the reader beside the service door at the back of the powder room, a door most guests would not even notice, painted the same cream as the walls, no handle visible from the outside. It clicked open. I ran. The service corridor was narrow and fluorescent lit and smelled of industrial detergent. Steam rolled along the floor from somewhere deeper in the building. I could hear shouting now muffled through the walls, guests reacting, staff calling to each other, the orderly world of the obsidian dissolving into beautiful, necessary chaos behind me. I kept running, following the corridor's single direction, until it opened into the laundry facility on the lower level rows of industrial machines. Great rolling carts of white linens, the air thick and hot, and heavy with the smell of bleach and fabric softener. A side door at the far end was marked exit. I hit it at full speed. The cold hit me like a fist. December in Newport at midnight was brutal and honest, and absolutely indifferent to my silk dress and bare arms. I stumbled onto a service road, gravel crunching under my heels, the resort's exterior lights casting orange pools across the dark. Behind me through the walls, the alarm was still screaming. Above me on the 14th floor, a single window glowed. I looked up at it without meaning to. A silhouette stood there, still watching. Julian. He was not running. He was not frantic. He simply stood at the window of our anniversary suite, with his hands in his pockets, looking down at the service road below, with the calm, patient stillness of a man who had done this before. A man who knew exactly what came next. My legs nearly buckled beneath me. I grabbed the corner of the building to stay upright and pressed myself against the cold stone chest, heaving tears finally spilling hot and fast down my freezing cheeks. He had been waiting for me to run, which meant he had already planned for what happened after. I ran until my heels gave out, 2 blocks from the resort's service entrance on a coastal road with no streetlights and nothing but the Atlantic hammering the rocks below. I kicked off my shoes and kept moving in bare feet on freezing asphalt. The cold barely registered. Nothing registered except the need to keep putting distance between myself and that 14th floor window. Between myself and the silhouette that had stood there watching me run, with the patience of someone who already knew the ending. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my clutch. Then I remembered. My phone was in a trash bin back in the Obsidian's powder room, broadcasting my location to a man who had been watching me with calm, patient eyes while I fled for my life. "Okay," I said out loud to the empty road because I needed to hear a human voice even if it was only my own. "Okay. Think, Brianna. Think." I flagged down a black car service idling near the resort's valet circle, its driver half asleep at the wheel. I knocked on the window and pressed $300 in cash, everything I had in my clutch, flat against the glass. "Providence," I said when he rolled it down. "Right now, please." He didn't ask questions. Cash at midnight in a cocktail dress has a way of discouraging questions. During the 40-minute drive, I sat rigid in the back seat with my bare feet pressed flat against the floor mat and my hands twisted together in my lap. Outside the window, Newport dissolved into highway, and highway dissolved into the dark outskirts of Providence, and I watched none of it. I was replaying the image of Julian at the 14th floor window. Not running, not frantic, not even angry, just watching. The way you watch something you have already decided the outcome of with the distant patient interest of someone reviewing a plan that is proceeding exactly as expected. We had been married for 12 months. 12 months during which I had signed paperwork, he slid across the table with his easy smile and his explanations that made perfect reasonable sense in the moment. Joint account registrations, asset management authorizations, emergency financial access forms. Just standard married couple logistics, he had said each time handing me a pen and watching me with those warm, attentive eyes. Saves us both running to the bank separately. I had signed every single one without reading past the first paragraph. The nausea hit me so violently I pressed my fist hard against my mouth and breathed through my nose until it passed. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror and said nothing. I was grateful for this more than I could have articulated. My private appraisal studio was in a building on the north edge of Providence's Arts District, 4 stories of converted mill space, slightly scruffy, the kind of building that looks like it holds nothing of value to anyone who doesn't know better. Julian knew it existed. I had mentioned it once early in our marriage, describing it as a workspace I used for sensitive authentication jobs. He had nodded and asked no follow-up questions. At the time, I had thought this was respect for my professional privacy. I understood now it was simply the behavior of someone who had already accounted for the studio in his calculations and found it irrelevant. He had been wrong about that. The backup credit card was linked to an account I had opened 2 years before we met, registered under my LLC, and tied to an email address I had never connected to anything Julian had access to. The secure laptop was registered entirely separately, and in the fireproof safe behind the Flemish landscape print on the east wall was a hard copy of every financial record I had ever kept, the kind of documentation that existed on paper, not in any cloud he could reach. Or so I had believed. The driver dropped me at the building without comment. I took the stairs barefoot to the 3rd floor, disabled the alarm with fingers that fumbled twice before they obeyed, and locked the door behind me. Then I stood in the dark for a moment, with my back against the door, just breathing. The studio smelled like linseed oil and old wood and the particular quiet of a place where careful work happens. I had spent thousands of hours in this room. Every hour of it felt in that moment like something I had built specifically to survive this night. I crossed to the desk, sat down at the secure laptop, and pulled up my bank's encrypted portal. "Come on," I whispered. "Come on, come on." The page loaded. My accounts were visible. Every dollar was there. My grandmother's inheritance, 8 years of accumulated savings from every authentication job I had ever completed. $500,000 sitting exactly where I had left it. I exhaled so hard my whole body shuddered with the release of it. I opened the transfer screen, entered my LLC routing number, typed the full amount, every cent, into the transfer field. My fingers were still trembling, but they were precise the way they got when I was working on something that mattered. I clicked confirm. The cursor spun, and then the screen went red. Transaction denied. I leaned so close to the monitor my breath fogged the screen. Certain I had misread it. Certain this was a technical error, a timeout, something ordinary with an ordinary explanation. I had not misread it. Your accounts have been temporarily frozen pursuant to an emergency joint account suspension request filed by your legal spouse, Julian Sterling, citing potential financial endangerment of a household asset. Please contact your nearest branch to verify identity in person. The words blurred. I blinked hard and read them again from the beginning. They did not change. "No," my voice cracked down the center of it. "No, no, no." I shoved back from the desk so hard the chair rolled and struck the wall. I pressed both hands flat over my face, and a sound tore out of my chest that I had no name for. Somewhere between a scream and a sob. Something raw and broken and furious. The sound of 8 years of careful, deliberate work being erased by a man in a resort bar with a smartphone and a marriage certificate. It lasted 3 seconds. Then I yanked my hands away, pressed them flat against my thighs, and forced myself to breathe. He had done it remotely. Probably before he had finished his Macallan at the resort bar. Probably while I was still running down that coastal road in bare feet thinking I was getting away. He had taken my money, in a single request, using paperwork I had signed at our kitchen table while a movie played in the background. And he handed me a pen with that warm, unhurried smile. Julian Sterling had locked me out of every cent I had ever earned. I stared at the red notification glowing on the screen. And for the first time since the crash from the 14th floor, I understood the full shape of what I was inside. This was not a marriage. It was a trap. And I had walked into it smiling on our very first date long before he had ever handed me a pen, long before I had ever touched a glass of wine he had poured. He had been building this since the beginning. I was sitting on the studio floor with my back against the desk when I heard the knock. 3 short raps, then 2, then 1. I scrambled upright, heart slamming into my throat, and pressed myself against the wall beside the door. "Who is it?" My voice came out barely above a whisper hoarse from the sob I had swallowed 20 minutes ago. "The woman from the spa." A pause. "The keycard had a tracking chip. I know you made it out. Open the door, Brianna." My hands flew to my mouth. I recognized the voice, low, careful, slightly rough at the edges, like someone who had learned to speak quietly as a matter of survival. I opened the door. She was still wearing the gray silk uniform, a heavy coat thrown over her shoulders. Her dark hair pulled back hard from a face that was striking and completely unfamiliar, and somehow underneath all of it, achingly desperate. She looked me over from bare feet to tear-stained cheeks, and something in her expression shifted, not softness exactly, but recognition. "You look exactly like I did," she said, 5 years ago. I stared at her. "Who are you?" "Not here." She glanced down the hallway. "We need to move. He'll have your studio on his search list within the hour." I grabbed nothing. There was nothing left to grab. She drove a Ford that was older than my career, its heater rattling and its windshield fogged at the corners. We drove north through the December dark without speaking much. And what she did say was short and direct. "Don't use your credit cards. Don't call anyone from your contacts list. Sit low in the seat when we pass toll cameras." I obeyed every instruction without argument because I had run out of the energy required for disbelief. We crossed into the Bronx just after 2 in the morning. The building she parked outside was red brick and tired-looking. Its fire escape rested a deep orange against the dark. She led me up 4 flights of stairs and unlocked an apartment door with 3 separate keys. Inside it smelled like dried herbs and old paper. I stepped in and she switched on a single lamp, and I turned around to look at the room, and my breath left my body completely. Every inch of one wall was covered. Photographs, printed documents, news clippings yellow at the edges, red string connecting faces to dates to locations. And in the center of all of it, arranged in a column like entries in a ledger, were photographs of women. 10 of them. Young, beautiful, well-dressed, smiling in most of the photos, the kind of smile you only have when someone you love is behind the camera. And in the second row, from the bottom, slightly larger than the others, printed from what looked like a social media profile, was a photograph of me. My legs stopped working. I grabbed the doorframe with both hands and held on. "Sit down," she said, steering me to a wooden chair at the table. "I'll make tea." "I don't want tea." My voice was shaking violently. I pointed at the wall with a hand I could not keep steady. "I want you to tell me what that is, right now, please." She set the kettle down and turned to face me. She stood very still for a moment, and I watched something move across her face. Not hesitation, but the particular quiet of someone preparing to say words they have been carrying for a very long time. "My name is Serafina Vance," she said. 5 years ago, I was Julian Sterling's wife." Her jaw tightened. "They told the world I drowned on our anniversary trip. A boating accident, the report said. Tragic. Nobody's fault." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table. "You didn't drown," I said, though it came out as barely more than a breath. "I didn't drown." Her eyes, dark and absolutely steady, held mine without flinching. "He tried. I survived. And I have spent every day since then in buildings like this one, in cities like this one, following him from resort to resort because I know his pattern, Brianna." She stepped closer. "He always chooses a coastal property. He always books the anniversary suite. And he always acts on the first anniversary." Her voice dropped. "Every single woman on that wall died within 12 months of marrying him." My ears were ringing. The herbs, the paper, the 10 photographs, all of it pressing in. "Tonight was supposed to be your anniversary," she said softly. "Tonight was supposed to be your last night." And that was the moment my tears finally came. Not a trickle, but a flood, hot and furious and unstoppable, pouring down my face while I sat in a stranger's kitchen in the Bronx and understood for the first time exactly how close I had come to becoming a photograph on a wall. The story is now reaching truths beyond imagination. To let me know you're still standing with Brianna in this battle, please comment on the number 1 below. And please note the following scenes contain certain fictional elements to heighten the drama. If you feel this is not for you, you may stop the video right here. But if you're ready, let's begin the most brutal chapter. Serafina made the tea anyway. She set a mug in front of me without asking, and I wrapped both hands around it because my fingers were still ice cold, and I needed something to hold on to that wasn't actively falling apart. She pulled a chair to the opposite side of the small kitchen table and sat down, and the apartment settled around us, the radiator ticking a car alarm somewhere 3 streets over the particular exhausted quiet of the Bronx at 4 in the morning. Then she pointed at the wall and began. 10 women in 6 years, she said. Her voice was flat and precise, the voice of someone who has rehearsed something so many times it has been worn smooth, all the jagged edges sanded away by repetition, until what remains is simply information. All of them wealthy, all of them single, all of them targeted within months of a significant asset event, an inheritance clearing probate, a business sale finalizing a trust fund, reaching maturity. She paused. All of them dead before their first wedding anniversary. I pressed my lips together so hard they went numb. The tea was warm against my palms. I held on to that warmth and made myself stay present. All of them. All except me. She looked down at her hands on the table. And Chloe. The name landed differently than the others. Something about the way she said it, careful, deliberate, the way you carry something fragile across a room and don't look at anything else while you're doing it. Who is Chloe? I asked. Serafina looked up at me, and for the first time in our entire conversation, the controlled surface cracked just slightly at the edges, a hairline fracture invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it, but I was looking. My younger sister, she said. Chloe Miller. She took our mother's maiden name after I disappeared. She was 26 when Julian met her. She didn't know. Her voice caught for exactly one syllable. She recovered immediately. I swear to you, she had no idea who he was when they met. He was introduced to her through a mutual contact at a gallery opening in Boston. By the time she put the pieces together, they were already married. My stomach dropped so completely I felt the absence of it. He married your sister. He thought you were dead, and he married your sister. He didn't know Chloe was my sister. Serafina's jaw tightened until a muscle jumped beneath her cheekbone. She used a different name, different city. We had not been publicly associated for 2 years by then. He had no reason to connect us. She stopped. Her eyes went somewhere I could not follow. He pushed her off a catamaran in the Aegean Sea 14 months ago. Private charter, open water, no witnesses except the man who hired the boat, and that man has since disappeared from every accessible record. She swallowed. A Greek fisherman pulled her out of the water 4 hours later, half dead from exposure with a dislocated shoulder and 2 cracked ribs. Julian had already filed the missing person report. He had already contacted her estate attorney. The mug in my hands had gone cold. I had not drunk a single sip. But she's alive, I said. The fierceness in my own voice surprised me. Serafina, Chloe is alive. She's alive. She's safe. Serafina's eyes were glassy, now bright and full, though no tears fell. I understood by then that she had decided some time ago not to cry in front of people she had not yet fully trusted. She has been living in Phoenix for 11 months, under a name I chose for her. She has a job. She has an apartment with a deadbolt and a neighbor she trusts. She paused. She calls me every Sunday morning at 8 a.m. to tell me she's still breathing. It is the only Sunday morning ritual I have left. I reached across the table and gripped her wrist. My own eyes were burning so badly I could barely see her. I am so sorry, I managed. The words felt catastrophically inadequate. I said them anyway because silence would have been worse. I am so incredibly sorry for what he did to your family. She nodded once tightly, and her hand turned under mine and gripped back for exactly 3 seconds. Then she released it and pulled herself back to the facts. It was clearly how she had survived this, staying inside the facts where things had shapes and edges and could be examined and processed and filed away. Feeling was for later. Facts were for now. The reason none of this has ever reached a courtroom, she continued, is not incompetence, It is not coincidence. It is not the failure of the system. She stood and crossed to the wall, pressing one finger against a photograph I had not noticed before, set slightly apart from the others higher up. A man in his early 60s photographed at what appeared to be a government function, silver-haired, square-jawed, the particular composed expression of someone who has spent decades being photographed in rooms where power lives. It is him. I leaned forward to read the caption printed beneath the photograph. Marcus Sterling, Deputy Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The room tilted. I felt it physically, a 2-degree shift in everything solid. The particular vertigo of a worldview reorganizing itself around new information too large to simply absorb. Julian's father, I breathed. Julian's father. Serafina turned back to face me. Every case involving Julian's wives was referred to field offices that Marcus oversees directly. Every autopsy performed on these women was reviewed by medical examiners operating under federal contracts that Marcus controls. Every missing persons file was closed within 48 hours of opening, stamped with a federal administrative designation that effectively ends further investigation. Her voice dropped lower. He doesn't simply cover for Julian after the fact. He designs the operation in advance. Julian identifies the targets. Marcus constructs the infrastructure of impunity around every single one. I pushed back from the table and stood because I could not hold still any longer. I paced to the window and back, my hands pressed flat against my temples, my mind running the implications forward and finding nowhere good to go. The FBI, I said. My voice had gone very quiet. Julian's father controls the FBI's Eastern Operations Division, and he has been using that position to... I stopped. Some things were too enormous for sentences to hold. How does anyone fight that? How does anyone even begin to fight that? Most people don't, Serafina said. Her voice was very simple. Most people end up as photographs. I turned and looked at the wall again. At the 10 faces. At my own face among them, slightly larger print, the newest entry positioned near the bottom, as though there were space left below it, for others who had not yet been targeted. My hands curled into fists at my sides until my knuckles ached. The grief was still there. It would always be there now, a permanent resident, but beneath it, deep and cold and hardening by the second, something else was forming. Something that had weight and direction, and a very specific edge. You said, I began, and my voice was steadier than I deserved, that someone inside Marcus's office has been waiting 15 years to bring them both down. Serafina picked up her mug. Over its rim, her dark eyes met mine, and in them, for the first time, I saw something that was not grief, not calculation, not the exhausted vigilance of a woman who had been running for 5 years. It looked almost like hope. Her name, she said quietly, is Valerie Jenkins. I did not sleep. Serafina gave me a blanket and a pillow and the couch, and I lay on my back staring at the ceiling while the Bronx moved through its nighttime noises around me. A siren somewhere distant, a dog barking 3 floors up, the radiator clicking and hissing like something old trying to stay alive. I stared at the shadows on the ceiling and counted the ways my life had ended in the last 6 hours. By the time gray morning light began pressing through the curtains, I had stopped counting. Serafina was already at the table when I sat up. She had a laptop open in front of her and a cup of coffee going cold at her elbow, and the expression on her face made the hair on my arms stand up before she said a single word. They activated it, she said, turning the screen toward me. The full network, 3 hours ago. The screen showed a law enforcement software dashboard, the kind I recognized from the contract documentation Julian had once left open on his home office desk, too proud of it to hide. Global Defense Solutions. Facial Recognition Integration Suite. Active deployment across 147 partnered agencies in the northeastern United States. My face was in the search field. Beneath my photograph, a case classification: missing person, voluntary disappearance, psychiatric welfare concern. He reported me missing, I said. My voice came out completely hollow. He called the police and told them I'm what, unstable? It's cleaner than a criminal charge. Serafina wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. Every officer in the partner network gets a soft alert with your photo. They're not looking for a suspect. They're looking for a fragile, confused woman who needs to be brought home safely. She paused. To him. I pressed both hands flat against the table and breathed through the nausea. So if anyone sees me, they call it in. His team gets the location within minutes. She met my eyes. You cannot use your face anywhere with a camera. Not a convenience store, not a street corner, not a gas station. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and said nothing because there was nothing adequate to say. Then her laptop chimed with a news alert. She clicked it, and I read the headline over her shoulder, and the last stable piece of the floor beneath me gave way entirely. Art Verify platform suspends prominent authentication expert amid fraud allegations. My photograph, a professional headshot from my firm's website. The one where I was smiling in front of a Flemish landscape I had just authenticated, sat beneath those words like an accusation. I grabbed the laptop and read, my eyes racing down the text. An anonymous report filed with the American Society of Appraisers alleged I had fraudulently certified 3 paintings with a combined estimated value of $14 million. The Art Verify platform had suspended my credentials pending investigation. The society had issued a formal notice to its members. My credentials, my license, 8 years of careful, meticulous reputation, first work. No. The word tore out of me, ragged and furious. I shoved the laptop back across the table and pressed my knuckles hard against my mouth. My eyes were burning, stinging, filling fast. No, he cannot. Those certifications were legitimate. Every single one. I have the documentation. I have the provenance records. I have. Brianna? Serafina's voice was steady and quiet. He is destroying my career. My voice cracked on the last word, broke completely, and the tears spilled over before I could stop them. I swiped them away with the back of my hand, furious at them, furious at everything. He froze my money. He locked me out of my own accounts, and now he is telling the entire industry that I am a fraud. I built that reputation from nothing. I built it from absolutely nothing, and he is burning it down in one night like it means nothing. I know. Serafina reached across the table and covered my hand with both of hers. Her grip was firm and warm. I know exactly what this feels like. He did the same to me. Different industry, same method. Her jaw tightened. He takes everything you built before he takes you. That way, even if someone believes you, you have nothing left to stand on. I stared at our hands on the table. Then I pulled a breath in so deep it hurt and held it and let it out slowly. My clients, I said. My 30 active clients. Check your firm email from a private browser. I did not want to look. I looked anyway. 41 new messages. Most of them were variations of the same thing, polite and regretful, and carefully worded, the kind of language people use when they have been advised by lawyers to keep things civil. Contract suspensions. Review requests. 2 outright terminations effective immediately. And at the bottom of the inbox where my portfolio server should have been a system notification, account access revoked by administrative request. 8 years of work. Every authenticated piece, every client record, every methodology note I had built my professional reputation on. Gone. A sound came out of me that I was not prepared for, a short, sharp, broken sound, like something small snapping under too much weight. I pressed both fists against my sternum and bent forward over the table. Serafina said my name again softly. Then her phone rang. She answered it, listened for 4 seconds, and held it out to me with an expression that frightened me more than anything I had seen that night. "It's for you," she said, "unknown number." I took the phone, pressed it to my ear. The voice on the other end was calm, warm, and perfectly familiar. The same voice that had told me just last night that it wanted everything for me. "Your father collapsed an hour ago," Julian said. "Hartford General, ICU. The doctors say it was cardiac stress." A pause precisely timed. "Come home, Brianna. This has gone far enough." The phone dropped from my fingers onto the table. I was already moving toward the door, my whole body lurching forward on pure instinct, when Serafina stepped directly into my path and gripped both my arms. "Stop," she said fiercely, her face inches from mine. "Stop. Think. That is exactly what he wants you to do." "Give me the phone," I said. "Please, I need to call my mother." Serafina handed it over without argument. I dialed from memory, my parents' landline, the number I had known since I was 6 years old. the number I had called from every dorm room and every airport and every difficult night of my adult life. It rang twice. Then my mother picked up and I burst into tears the moment I heard her voice. "Brianna!" She said my name like a prayer, quick and desperate. "Brianna, thank God. Are you safe? Where are you?" "I'm safe." I pressed the back of my hand hard against my mouth to keep the sobs from overwhelming me completely. "Mom, I'm safe. Are you okay? Is Dad? Are you okay? He's stable." Her voice wavered on the word. "They have him in the cardiac unit. He's stable, sweetheart. He's asking for you." The sob I had been holding back broke through. I turned away from Serafina and pressed my forehead against the cold wall, shaking. "What happened?" I managed. "Mom, what happened?" She took a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was steady in the way that my mother's voice got when she was terrified, but absolutely refused to show it. The voice she had used when my father's first scare happened 2 years ago. The voice of a woman who had decided panic was not an option she could afford. "3 men came to the house at 6 this morning," she said. "They showed federal identification. They said they were from the Bureau and that you were under active investigation for financial crimes. Money laundering, they said. Wire fraud." Her voice hardened slightly. "They said that if we contacted you or assisted you in any way, we could be charged as co-conspirators." My whole body went cold. "Mom, your father was standing right behind me when they said it." Her voice dropped. "You know how he is. He went completely white. He started saying your name over and over, just your name, and then he sat down on the floor and he couldn't get up." I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor myself, my knees pulled to my chest, tears running freely down my face and dripping off my chin. The guilt was physical, a crushing weight across my sternum. My father. My quiet, brilliant, gentle father, who collected first edition art history books and grew tomatoes in the backyard, and had never once in his entire life done anything that deserved to be weaponized against his daughter. "This is my fault," I whispered. "Mom, this is my—" "Stop that immediately," she said sharply with such force that I actually stopped. "You listen to me, Brianna Grace Thorne. Whatever Julian Sterling has done, and I do not know the full shape of it yet, none of it is your fault. Do you understand me? None of it." I pressed my lips together and nodded even though she couldn't see me. "Good," she said. "Now, the men who came to the door." Something in her tone changed, became careful and deliberate. I sat up straighter. "I photographed them," she said. "All 3 of them. Their badges, their faces, the car they arrived in, the license plates. I used the family app, the encrypted one your father set up 5 years ago when he was going through that privacy phase." A pause. "I assumed Julian wouldn't know about an application your father downloaded from a Lithuanian developer in 2019. A sound came out of me that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. "Mom, I sent everything to your secondary address, the one you opened under your LLC. Check it when you can." I was already on my feet. "Can you send it to this number instead, right now?" "Already done," she said simply. I put the call on speaker and opened the messages on Serafina's phone. 6 photographs loaded one after another. 3 men in dark suits on my parents' front porch. Close-up shots of their identification wallets. She had somehow gotten them to hold the badges still long enough. The car, a black Suburban with government plates. And the faces. I knew one of them. Not well. Just a face I had seen twice in the lobby of Julian's office building. A broad-shouldered man with a scar through his left eyebrow, who Julian had once referred to as facilities management. The kind of vague title that explained nothing and was meant to. "Serafina." I held the phone out to her. She looked at the photograph for 3 seconds. Then her eyes came up to mine and they were hard and bright. "That's one of Marcus's contract operators," she said. "Private security. They're not FBI. Those badges are duplicates." Her jaw set. "Marcus has had a small team of them running personal operations for at least 10 years. They work completely off the books." I looked back at the photographs, at my parents' front door, at the porch where my father used to sit in the evenings and read. The grief was still there. It would always be there now. But it had company, a cold, focused fury that was settling into my bones like something permanent. "Mom," I said into the phone, "I need you to do one more thing for me. Go somewhere else tonight. Take Dad's sister's house in Vermont. Don't tell anyone where you're going except me. Don't use your regular phone." "Brianna." Please, Mom. My voice broke cleanly on the last word. Please just do this one thing. A long pause, then quietly. All right, sweetheart, all right. I love you, I said. Tell Dad I love him. Tell him. I stopped, steadied myself. Tell him I'm going to fix this. I promise. I ended the call and stood in the center of Serafina's kitchen with the photographs on the screen in front of me and a decision fully formed in my chest before I had even consciously made it. Julian had taken my money, my career, my reputation. He had put my father in a hospital bed. He was not going to take anything else. Serafina disappeared into the bedroom for 3 minutes. When she came back, she was carrying a photograph in both hands, holding it with a careful deliberateness that told me before she said a word that whatever was in that picture mattered more to her than almost anything else in this apartment. She placed it on the table between us and sat down. The woman in the photograph was in her early 50s, photographed from a distance through what looked like a long lens. She was walking down a wide federal building corridor in a charcoal blazer and low heels, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm, her silver-streaked hair pulled back immaculately. The kind of woman you walk past in a government building and immediately understand is the one who actually runs everything, while the men with titles stand in front of cameras. Valerie Jenkins, Serafina said. Chief Administrative Secretary to Marcus Sterling, 15 years in that office. She touched the edge of the photograph with one fingertip gently, the way you touch something that can be hurt. My mother. The word landed in the room and stayed there. I looked at the photograph again, then at Serafina's face, then back at the photograph, searching for the resemblance, the line of the jaw, something around the eyes, and finding it faint but undeniable. She knows you're alive, I said. She's known since the beginning. Serafina's voice was even controlled, not a crack in it, but her hands were pressed flat against the table in a way that told me she was working hard to keep it that way. She was the one who found the doctor who reconstructed my face. She was the one who put the first month's rent on this apartment under a name that doesn't exist. She has been keeping me alive from inside that building for 5 years, and she has never once been able to acknowledge that I am her daughter. My chest ached because Marcus would know. Because Marcus would know. She exhaled through her nose. He ordered Julian to kill me. He signed off on it the same way he signs off on budget allocations and field assignments. My mother sat 2 offices away from the man who had her daughter murdered, and she could not say a single word. Her voice finally frayed at the edges on that last sentence. She pressed her lips together and recovered. She told me once over a burner phone at 2 in the morning that she had decided the only way to honor what almost happened to me was to make sure it couldn't happen to anyone else. 15 years of waiting, I said softly. 15 years of collecting. Serafina stood and crossed to the kitchen counter where a padded envelope sat that I had not noticed before. She brought it to the table and opened it carefully, laying out the contents one piece at a time. A key card. Black like the one she had pressed into my hand at the resort, but this one had a small silver stripe along the bottom edge. A folded architectural diagram printed on thin paper in blue ink. Building schematics. I recognized the header immediately, the FBI New York field office. 26 Federal Plaza, Lower Manhattan. A single printed page with a column of alphanumeric codes, and a small sealed plastic sleeve containing what looked like a sheet of transparent film no larger than my palm. The keycard accesses Marcus's private corridor on the 7th floor, Serafina said, pointing at each item in turn. The codes disable the secondary alarm system between midnight and 2 a.m. during the maintenance window. My mother found the schedule 3 years ago and has been verifying it every month since. She tapped the plastic sleeve. And that is a transfer film of Marcus's right thumbprint. My mother lifted it from a coffee mug 8 days ago when she realized you were the next target. I stared at the items on the table. 8 days ago, before I had even known there was anything wrong with my marriage, Valerie Jenkins had already been preparing. The ledger, I said. Serafina, if Marcus keeps records. He does. Her eyes were steady and certain. My mother has seen it. A physical book handwritten kept in his private office in a location she identified 18 months ago but could never access alone. She paused. She needs someone who can get past the biometric locks, someone whose fingerprints aren't in any federal database, Someone who can interpret coded financial notations without a forensic accounting team. Someone like me. I looked at the transfer film, at the architectural diagram, at the column of access codes that Valerie Jenkins had spent 15 years accumulating one digit at a time from inside the belly of the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country. The painting, I said suddenly. When Julian took me to Marcus's office last spring, I brought a restored piece as a gift. My mother told me about it. A faint, grim satisfaction moved across Seraphina's face. Marcus held it up to examine the brushwork. She said he was practically preening. The frame was coated in nano-adhesive film. I touched the transfer sleeve on the table. Same principle, different surface. I looked up. I have his complete right thumbprint from that visit. I kept the frame. For the first time in this entire nightmare of a conversation, Seraphina's expression shifted into something that almost resembled hope. "It's at your studio," she asked. "In the fireproof safe, behind the Flemish landscape." I straightened in my chair, and something in my spine realigned, something that had been bent since the moment I heard that crash from the 14th floor finally settling back into place. "I can have it in 4 hours." Seraphina looked at her watch. Then she looked at me. "Marcus Sterling leaves for Washington at 6 a.m. Acela," she said. "He won't return until Thursday. His office will be minimally staffed for 36 hours. She pushed the keycard across the table until it was directly in front of my hands. "We have one night, Brianna. One chance." I picked up the keycard. "Then we don't waste it," I said. We drove back to Providence at 4 in the morning to retrieve the painting frame. Seraphina kept to the back roads and killed the headlights 2 blocks from my building. I went in alone, moving fast through the dark studio, with a flashlight between my teeth, working the combination on the fireproof safe with hands that had finally stopped shaking and started doing what they were trained to do. The frame was exactly where I had left it. A gilt-edged rectangle 16 by 20 inches, the kind that looks like something from a Flemish estate sale and costs accordingly. I turned it over and examined the inner surface under the flashlight beam. The nano-adhesive film was still there, a nearly invisible layer applied 3 weeks before our visit to Marcus's office, pressed into the inner lip of the frame where a hand would naturally grip it. Marcus Sterling had held this frame in both hands for nearly a minute, turning it to catch the light, commenting on the quality of the gilding. He had been extraordinarily helpful. I carried the frame back to the car tucked under my arm like something ordinary and said, "I have everything we need." By the time we returned to the Bronx, I had gone over the plan in my head 4 complete times. Seraphina spread the building schematics across the kitchen table, and we stood over them with cups of coffee going cold at our elbows, and I did what I had spent 8 years training myself to do. I read the details. "Walk me through the access point," I said. Seraphina traced the route with her finger. "Service entrance on the building's north side. Valerie leaves it on the maintenance override between 11:45 p.m. and 12:15. 30 minutes. We go in at exactly 11:50. What are we wearing?" "Biohazard remediation uniforms, full suits, respirator masks, equipment cases." She glanced up. "Marcus has a standing contract with a private environmental firm for quarterly air quality testing. Valerie scheduled a surprise supplemental inspection for tonight's system, shows it as authorized in the building management database. Anyone who sees us will assume we're contractors." I nodded slowly. "The secondary alarm?" "Disabled during the maintenance window, but there's a motion sensor on the 7th floor that runs on a separate circuit." She pointed to a small square on the diagram 2/3 of the way down the private corridor. "It resets every 40 seconds. We have to move in segments, 35 seconds of movement, pause for 5, move again." "I can do that." "I know you can." She looked at me steadily. "The biometric lock on Marcus's office door reads thumbprint and keycard simultaneously. Both required. Neither alone opens it." I held up the painting frame. "Then we'll have both." Seraphina's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did, a quiet, fierce recognition, the look of someone who has been fighting alone for a very long time and has just realized they are no longer alone. I closed my eyes. I went back to that afternoon in Marcus's office. April, bright spring light coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Julian's hand warm on the small of my back as he guided me through the door. Marcus rising from behind his desk. The momentary stiffening of his posture quickly smoothed over. the gray book small and thick-spined disappearing into a wall panel before I had fully registered what I was looking at. The electronic click of a concealed lock. The tree. Tell me about the office layout, I said, opening my eyes. Serafina pointed to the diagram. Large open space. Desk here, conference seating here, bookcase along the west wall. She paused. And in the northeast corner? The garden, I said. He has an indoor garden, a full-grown Japanese black pine in a stone planter. He told Julian it was a gift from a foreign dignitary. I closed my eyes again and saw at precisely the tree's twisted trunk, the pale gray stone of the planter, the careful raking of the decorative gravel around its base. When he moved to close the wall panel, he was standing in front of the garden, not the bookcase, not the desk. I opened my eyes and pointed to the northeast corner of the schematic. The ledger is in this planter, I said, under the stone. That's why there's no visible safe in the office design. It's underneath the tree. Serafina stared at me. How are you certain? She asked. Because I authenticate things for a living. I set the painting frame down on the table. People who hide things in obvious places, safes, vaults, locked drawers, are afraid of thieves. People who hide things in plain sight are afraid of people who are already inside. I looked at her steadily. Marcus Sterling isn't afraid of a break-in. He's afraid of his own people. That tree has been in that office for 11 years, according to the building records I pulled for his profile. 11 years of everyone walking past it every single day and never looking at it twice. Serafina sat down slowly. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes for a moment. When she lowered them, her expression had sharpened into something that looked for the first time like genuine anticipation. Valerie leaves the suits in the utility closet on the building's basement level, she said. Equipment cases pre-stocked. She'll be in her office until 8 p.m., then home. She cannot be there when it happens. She paused. If we are not out of that building by 3 a.m., she pulls the fire alarm remotely as a distraction. And after 3 a.m., Serafina met my eyes. After 3 a.m., she said quietly, we are entirely on our own. I looked at the building schematic, at the northeast corner, at the small, unmarked square where a Japanese black pine sat in a stone planter in the office of the Deputy Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and had sat there for 11 years and had been looked at every single day and had never once been truly seen. Then we leave at 11, I said, and we don't come back without that ledger. The FBI New York field office at 26 Federal Plaza does not look like a building that can be broken into. It looks like a building that was designed by someone who understood on a fundamental level that architecture can be a form of threat. 34 floors of dark concrete and reinforced glass, rising straight out of Lower Manhattan, surrounded by Jersey barriers and camera housings, and the particular quality of stillness that only exists around buildings where very serious people work very serious hours. I had been inside it once briefly with Julian, and I had felt small in the way you feel small inside a cathedral. Not awed exactly, but reminded of your own scale. Standing outside it at 11:48 in the evening in a white biohazard remediation suit, with a respirator mask hanging around my neck and an equipment case in each hand, I felt something different. I felt like I was about to do the most dangerous thing I had ever done in my life, and I was going to do it anyway. Service entrance is north side, Serafina said quietly beside me. She was already masked, her voice slightly muffled, her posture so completely convincing as a contractor that even I believed it for a moment. 30 seconds. We walked. Not quickly. Quickly attracts attention. We walked the way people walk when they belong somewhere, with the particular deliberate confidence of individuals who have a job to do and would very much like to do it and go home. The service entrance was exactly where the schematic showed it, a heavy steel door set flush into the building's north face. No signage, a card reader mounted at shoulder height. Serafina swiped the override card Valerie had programmed. The door clicked, opened inward 2 inches. I released a breath I had been holding since the Bronx and followed her inside. The corridor was narrow and fluorescent lit and smelled of cleaning solution and recycled air. Supply carts lined one wall. Overhead, the ventilation system hummed at a frequency I could feel in my back teeth. A sign at the far end read, "Authorized personnel only," in red letters that seemed in that moment to be directed personally at me. Motion sensor activates at the elevator bank, Serafina murmured, checking her watch. We move in 35-second intervals. I'll count. When I say stop, you stop immediately. Don't ask why, don't look around. Just stop. Understood, I said. We took the service elevator to the 7th floor, and when the doors opened into a carpeted corridor lined with office doors bearing small brass plates, I felt the shift in atmosphere immediately. This was not the functional basement level. This was where decisions happened. The air was quieter, more careful the way air gets in rooms where important things are regularly said. Move, Serafina said. We walked. 35 seconds. Past 3 office doors. Past a glass-walled conference room dark except for the standby lights on a row of monitors. Past a water station and a potted plant, and a framed photograph of the current FBI director that watched us pass with the particular blankness of official portraiture. Stop. I stopped, planted my feet, stared at a fixed point on the wall directly ahead of me, and held perfectly still while 5 seconds ticked past, with the slowness of something geological. Move. We went again. The second checkpoint was a glass security partition with a card reader and a camera mounted in the upper corner of the ceiling. The camera swept a 180-degree arc on a 40-second rotation. Serafina had drawn the timing on a napkin in the car and made me memorize it. We reached the partition at the beginning of a sweep and waited pressed flat against the wall while the lens completed its arc and began its return. Now, she said. I swiped the card. The partition clicked. We moved through in 4 seconds and were past the camera's field of view before it completed the return sweep. I did not realize my hands were shaking until I looked down at them. Breathe, Serafina said without looking at me. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Don't let it show in your shoulders. I'm fine, I said, and was surprised to find that I mostly meant it. The private corridor was shorter than I had expected, just 8 doors, each one dark, each one closed. The brass plate on the 7th read simply, Sterling M., Deputy Director. Below the plate, a biometric panel glowed faint blue in the dim corridor light. We stopped in front of it. I set down my equipment case, opened it, and removed the transfer film from its protective sleeve, with 2 fingers handling it the way I handled irreplaceable things in my professional life, with absolute steadiness and no wasted movement. The film was barely larger than a postage stamp. 8 months of careful preparation pressed into a surface thinner than a human hair. I pressed it against the biometric panel's reader surface. The blue glow pulsed once, twice, then turned green. Serafina swiped the access card simultaneously exactly as Valerie had instructed, and I heard the mechanism in the door disengage with a sound that was much quieter than I expected, a soft, decisive click, like a puzzle piece finding its place. The door swung inward on perfect hinges. The office beyond was dark. I could make out the shape of the desk, the bookcase, the conference chairs. And in the northeast corner, exactly where I had placed it in my memory, the silhouette of the Japanese black pine rose against the ambient glow of the Manhattan skyline coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I stepped inside, and then I stopped, because there was a light in the room, not an overhead light. A small, precise beam, the kind cast by a desk lamp left on a low setting, coming from somewhere to the left of the desk. And underneath the door that connected to the private inner office, a thin, steady strip of yellow light. Someone was in there. The inner office door did not open. I stood completely still in the dark, my pulse hammering so loudly I was certain it was audible, watching that thin strip of yellow light beneath the inner door, and waiting for it to move, for a shadow to cross it, for the sound of a chair scraping, or a voice, or footsteps. Nothing moved. Serafina touched my arm and pointed upward. I followed her finger to a small box mounted high on the wall near the ceiling, an automatic lamp timer, its green indicator blinking slowly in the dark. A security measure designed to give the impression of occupancy to anyone watching from the street below. I pressed my palm flat against my sternum and exhaled through my teeth. Timed lamp. Serafina breathed against my ear. Standard protocol for executive suites. Goes off at midnight. As if on cue, the strip of yellow light beneath the inner door disappeared. The office settled back into the cool amber glow of the Manhattan skyline pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I genuinely hate this building, I whispered. "Stay focused," she said. But the ghost of something that almost qualified as a smile moved across her face in the dark, and it steadied me more than any serious word could have. I turned to the room. Marcus Sterling's office was exactly as I remembered, and nothing like what I remembered. My single visit had given me broad strokes, the scale, the quality of the furniture, the uncluttered precision of a man who understood that power communicates through restraint. But memory is a compressed file. Standing inside it now, in the dark, with my equipment case at my feet and every nerve ending firing, I noticed details I had missed entirely. The bookcase held no personal items. Not a photograph, not a memento, not a single object that might tell you who this man was when he left these walls behind. The conference table was polished to the point of reflectivity. The desk surface held only a telephone, a monitor, and one pen in a holder of dark stone. A room that said in every possible way nothing here can be used against me. Nothing except the tree. The Japanese black pine stood in the northeast corner, exactly as I had placed it in my memory. Its trunk twisted into a slow, elegant curve that had taken 40 years to achieve. Its needles impossibly dark against the ambient light from outside. The stone planter was larger than I had expected, nearly 3 feet across pale gray quartz, shot through with threads of silver and white. Someone had raked the decorative gravel around the base into precise concentric circles, the kind of careful repetitive work that takes real time from a very busy man. Which meant he cared about this tree, which meant he would absolutely notice if it was disturbed. "Carefully," I said. Serafina was already beside me, lowering herself to one knee at the planter's edge, pulling the UV light from her equipment case. She swept the beam slowly across the inner rim of the stone, along the base, across the gravel surface, then back along the planter's outer face, covering every centimeter with the deliberate thoroughness of someone who had learned to look for exactly the kinds of things most people are trained not to see. Nothing registered. She swept it a second time slower. "There," I said. It was barely visible, a slight variation in the quartz texture on the planter's inner left face, 8 inches below the soil line. Not a crack. Not a seam. A circular depression perhaps 4 inches across its edge, marginally smoother than the surrounding stone. The UV beam caught it at precisely the right angle and held it for one suspended second. "Back," I said. "Right there." She brought the beam back. We both looked at it without speaking. "Biometric reader," I said. "Same principle as the door panel. The stone is the surface." Serafina reached into the equipment case and placed the transfer film in my open hand. My hands were completely steady. Even in that moment, even crouching in the dark office of a man who had authorized my murder, my hands were steady. 8 years of handling irreplaceable objects had trained them for exactly this, for the moment when the thing you are touching cannot be dropped, cannot be fumbled, cannot be given back to do again. I pressed the transfer film firmly and evenly against the circular depression and held it without moving for 4 full seconds. A vibration moved through the stone, subtle mechanical deep. Then a sound so quiet it was almost imaginary. A click. A section of the planter's inner face, 6 inches wide and 4 inches tall, swung inward on a hinge machined so precisely it was essentially silent. Behind it, a space carved directly into the stone, roughly the size of a shoebox, lit faintly by a single interior LED. Inside that space lay 2 objects. A book, small, thick, bound in gray leather so dark it was nearly black, its cover entirely unmarked. And a memory card in a sealed protective sleeve, the kind manufactured to survive fire, water, and physical impact. Serafina made a sound I had never heard from her, small and fractured and private, the sound of someone who has been waiting 5 years for something and has just watched it arrive. She pressed the back of her hand hard against her mouth. 1 second. Then she lowered her hand and her face was composed again, except for her eyes, which she could not quite control. I picked up the book with both hands and opened the cover. The first page held one line written in Marcus Sterling's precise, controlled handwriting. "Target final Thorn B algorithm key. Project 7K13. Authorization required before execution." Below that, a date, 3 weeks ago. The room pressed inward around me. I read the line again. My name. In this man's hand. in this hidden space, beneath a tree that had sat in this corner for 11 years, while his son smiled at me across candlelit restaurant tables and told me he wanted everything for me. From the corridor outside, clearly and unmistakably came the sound of footsteps approaching the door. Serafina grabbed my arm and pulled me down behind the desk. We crouched there in the dark, pressed flat against the heavy mahogany, the gray ledger clutched against my chest, and the memory card in Serafina's fist, and we did not move. I counted my own heartbeats, because there was nothing else to do, nothing else I could control, nothing else that had a number I could hold on to. 1, 2, 3. The footsteps in the corridor slowed as they reached the office door. A flashlight beam swept underneath it, thin and probing, moving left to right across the carpet pile, with the patient thoroughness of someone who does this exact thing 40 times a night and has stopped expecting to find anything. Then it swept away. The footsteps continued past. I counted to 30 before I exhaled, and the exhale came out ragged and unsteady in a way that embarrassed me, even though no one could hear it. "Security round," Serafina breathed. 45-minute cycle. We have maybe 20 minutes before he comes back. 20 minutes. I straightened, placed the ledger on the desk surface, and opened it to the first coded page. Marcus Sterling had not written in plain language. Of course he had not. The entries were in a compressed notation system, a combination of number sequences, abbreviations, and what appeared to be modified accounting shorthand. The kind of code that looks like administrative paperwork to an untrained eye. Dense, deliberate, designed to be meaningless to anyone who happened to glance at it. I was not an untrained eye. "Photograph every page," I said to Serafina, handing her my phone. "Start from the back, I'll read while you shoot." She took the phone without argument and moved to the last page, working backward with the focused efficiency of someone who has learned not to waste a single second when seconds are the only currency that matters. I pulled the desk lamp to its lowest angle, angled it away from the windows, and began to decode. The system was not complicated. Marcus had built it from standard federal case notation. I had seen similar structures in provenance documentation for government-owned artworks, the kind of internal shorthand that federal archivists use when they want information accessible to colleagues but impenetrable to outsiders. He had simply added a personal cipher layer on top, substituting letters for numbers in a rotation pattern that shifted every 3 entries. A small private key, elegant in its simplicity. It took me 4 minutes to identify it. 4 minutes, and then his entire private record opened itself to me like a confession that had been waiting 11 years to be heard. The liquidation list occupied the first 30 pages. 10 entries, each one a woman's name followed by a case number, a date of marriage, a date of termination, a method code, and a single letter indicating status. 8 of them carried the letter C, closed, completed. Each of those 8 entries was a woman who had eaten dinner with Julian Sterling, who had laughed at his stories, who had signed paperwork at a kitchen table, and gone to sleep believing she was safe. 8 women. 8 letters. 8 closures that Marcus Sterling had processed with the same bureaucratic efficiency he brought to budget approvals and field assignments. The 9th entry, Serafina Vance, carried the letter F, failed. The 10th entry, the last one printed in slightly darker ink, as though the pen had pressed harder or had simply been newer, carried the letter P. Pending. Beside the letter P was my name. Brianna A. Thorne. Married 11 months, 3 weeks, 4 days. Target acquisition confirmed. Method assigned. Timeline active. I pressed my lips together until they went numb. My jaw ached from how hard I was clenching it. My eyes burned hot and furious and completely dry because I had decided somewhere in the last 36 hours that I had already used my tears on everything that deserved them. And this cold administrative notation that had reduced my existence to a single pending letter. This was going to fuel something harder than grief. I would feel the full weight of it later, when it was over, when it could not cost me anything. I turned the page. The method codes were what destroyed me most completely, not in the hot, gasping way that shock destroys, but in the cold, clinical way that precise language always destroys more thoroughly than any scream could. Succinylcholine, xenon gas, insulin administered during natural sleep cycles. each one chosen for the same singular quality, undetectable in a standard autopsy, invisible in a toxicology panel that would be reviewed by medical examiners operating under federal contracts that Marcus controlled directly. Each method required only one thing: access to the victim's living space. Access that a husband has automatically, unremarkably, legally from the very first night. I thought about my wine glass, still full, still sitting on that white tablecloth at the Obsidian Resort, deep in red and completely untouched, and Julian watching me across the candlelight with his warm eyes and his easy smile waiting. "Brianna." Serafina's voice was soft and careful. She had stopped photographing and was watching me, her expression carrying the particular understanding of someone who has already read these pages years ago and survived the reading of them. "Keep shooting," I said. My voice came out completely even. I did not know how. "We don't have time." She kept shooting. I moved to the back section of the ledger. Project 7. K13 occupied 40 dense pages. Budget allocations, contractor codes, payment schedules, recipient account numbers in a rotating cipher. It resolved when I decoded it into a diagram of extraordinary, devastating simplicity. $5 billion in federal defense infrastructure funding approved through Marcus Sterling's division over 6 years. 30% had gone to legitimate contracts. 70% had been routed through a cascade of shell companies, all registered to Global Defense Solutions subsidiaries across 4 countries, and deposited into accounts that existed, as far as any official record was concerned, nowhere at all. And then I reached the final pages. No heading, no case numbers, no dates. Just 2 lines of notation that decoded into something I had to read 3 times before the meaning of it would hold, still long enough for me to believe it. The algorithm embedded in the Thorn art collection. Access requires biological air. Authorization unlocks primary vault. Estimated value of Project 7K13. Primary vault, 2.5 billion US dollars. I set the ledger down on the desk surface, pressed both hands flat beside it, stared at those 2 lines until the letters blurred and reformed and blurred again. My grandfather, the quiet, brilliant man who had taught me to read paintings from the age of 7, who had pressed his thumb against a brushstroke and said, "Feel the intention in it, Brianna, not just the surface." Who had spent 40 years building a collection of post-war European works and had given them to me piece by piece, not as inheritance but as education, each one a lesson in seeing what others walked past. Who had told me more times than I could count that the most valuable things in the world were always the things that looked ordinary to everyone else. He had hidden something inside the authentication algorithm he had passed down to me across 3 decades of careful, patient teaching. A key. A key to $2.5 billion. And Julian Sterling had spent 3 years building a marriage, a life, a love story, not to steal the art, but to marry the only person alive who could unlock it. And then to remove her cleanly using paperwork she had signed herself. I was not a wife. I was never a wife. I was a password. The last one. The only one. "Brianna!" Serafina's hand came down on my shoulder, firm and grounding, pulling me back from whatever edge I had been standing at. "We have 9 minutes. I picked up the phone. 17 pages left to photograph. I worked without speaking, without stopping, turning each page with hands that had begun finally. Despite everything, despite all the discipline I had forced on them for the last 2 hours to shake. The last page was photographed. The ledger returned to its stone hollow. The compartment sealed back into silence. Serafina grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the office door. Behind us from the far end of the corridor, the security guard's footsteps were already coming back. The door opened before we reached it. Not the security guard making his rounds. Not a building employee. Not anyone I could have prepared myself for, even though some part of me, the part that had been running quiet calculations since the moment I read my name in that ledger, had already known on some animal level that this was always how it would end. Julian Sterling stepped into the office and closed the door behind him with a soft, deliberate click. He was not wearing the suit from the anniversary dinner. He wore a black fitted shirt and dark trousers, no tie, no cufflinks, none of the carefully constructed armor of polish and charm that I had spent 12 months believing was simply who he was. Without all of that, he looked different. Harder. The face was the same, the jaw I had touched 1,000 times the eyes I had looked into and believed completely, the mouth that had kissed my forehead 2 nights ago with such practiced, unhurried warmth. But the warmth was gone from it, the way warmth leaves a room when a window breaks. What remained underneath was precise and cold and entirely without apology. He looked at me, then at Serafina, then at the planter in the northeast corner where the stone face of the hidden compartment had been carefully sealed back into place, but could not entirely disguise the faint disturbance in the raked gravel around its base, the particular imprecision of people who had been moving quickly. "The biometric panel sends me a notification," he said with a conversational calm so perfect it made my skin crawl. He might have been explaining a thermostat setting or a calendar reminder. Every time it's accessed, my father believed it was monitoring him. He never considered it was actually monitoring the ledger. He tilted his head precisely 2 degrees to the right, a gesture I recognized, a gesture I had once found thoughtful, and now understood was simply mechanical. "You decoded it." It was not a question. "Every word," I said. My voice did not shake. I was genuinely astonished by this fact. My hands were trembling, my legs were trembling, my entire chest felt like something inside it was tearing slowly along a seam, thread by thread, but my voice held, clear and even and present. I had never been so grateful for anything so small in my entire life. Project 7K13, the liquidation list. All 10 names with dates and methods. I have photographs of every single page. Something moved behind his eyes. Not shock. Julian did not shock easily. I had learned that much in 12 months. Something more deliberate. A recalculation. A man assessing new variables. "Give me the phone, Brianna." "No." He began to cross the room toward me. Not running, walking measured and deliberate and utterly unhurried the way you approach something you are completely certain you will catch. I stepped backward and felt the bookcase hit my shoulders. My free hand found the edge of a shelf behind me and gripped it hard enough that the wood bit into my palm. "You were never supposed to be anything other than a transaction," he said, and the perfect flatness in his voice as he said it. No cruelty, no heat, no emotion of any kind. Just the pure factual delivery of a man stating an administrative fact was so much worse than anger could have been. "Your grandfather built something extraordinary without understanding what he was building. You inherited it without knowing what you were inheriting. This was always a retrieval operation. Nothing personal was ever intended." Nothing personal. The words tore out of me jagged and furious and burning. My eyes were stinging so badly the room was blurring at the edges, and I absolutely refused to let a single tear fall. "I was your wife. I sat across from you in restaurants and laughed at your jokes and signed the papers you slid across the table because I trusted you with everything I had. And you were sitting there calculating the most efficient method to kill me." "Yes," he said, flatly, directly, 4 feet away now, 3. "The women on that list were transactions," he said. "All of them, including you." He reached for the phone in my hand. Serafina moved. She came from his left, from the shadow beside the conference table where she had been positioning herself in complete silence while he spoke, and she hit him with everything she had accumulated in 5 years of rage and grief, and weighting her shoulder driven hard into his ribs, her full weight slamming him sideways into the edge of the conference table with a crack that rang off the windows like a gunshot. Julian grunted a short punched-out sound and staggered. His reach for the phone missed by 6 inches. Serafina got both hands into his collar and drove her knee upward with vicious precision. He was faster than she expected. He twisted, took the blow on his hip, caught the table edge with one hand to steady himself, and spun her hard into the bookcase behind her. The impact was brutal. Books cascaded off the shelves in a crashing wave. Serafina hit the shelf edge with her shoulder and cried out. The memory card flew from her fist and skidded somewhere beneath the conference table. Gone in the dark, a short, raw sound of real pain tore out of her that hit me somewhere so deep I nearly stopped moving, and Julian's hand closed around her forearm, like a steel cable pulled tight, fingers digging in. "Go!" she screamed at me. Her voice was ripped and fierce and absolute. "Brianna, go! Right now!" I ran. I hit the office door with both palms and threw it open so hard it crashed against the wall, and I was in the corridor and running before the sound of it finished echoing. Behind me, I heard furniture going over, Julian's voice rising for the first time to something with a genuine edge in it, Seraphina's grunt of fierce effort followed by another crash. Every instinct in my body wanted to turn back. Every instinct screamed that I was abandoning her, that I was running while she fought, that I was a coward who was leaving behind the only person who had chosen to stand beside me in this. I kept running, because Seraphina had made her choice with complete clarity, in full knowledge of the cost. And the only thing I could do that would not make that sacrifice meaningless was to make it worth something. The service elevator was at the corridor's end. I hit the call button with my palm and pressed my back against the wall beside the doors, chest heaving, the phone clutched against my sternum with both hands, like something irreplaceable, which it was, which it absolutely was. The elevator arrived in 11 seconds. Each one lasted approximately a year. The doors opened. I stepped inside. From somewhere beyond the closed office door at the far end of the corridor, muffled but unmistakable, I heard Seraphina shout my name one final time. Not a scream of pain, not a plea. A command fierce and certain and unafraid, the voice of a woman who had already decided exactly how this moment was going to end, and had made her peace with every part of it. The elevator doors closed. I pressed both hands flat over my face and stood in the descending car in total darkness, breathing in counts of 4, while the evidence of everything pressed against my palms, and the woman who had saved my life twice in 36 hours was somewhere above me in that building, paying the price of the second time. I would not waste it. I would not waste a single second of what she had given me. The coffee shop in Queens was called Sunrise Diner, and it had been open continuously since 1971, and it smelled like burned coffee and something fried, and it was the most beautiful place I had ever been in my life. I chose a corner booth with a wall at my back and a direct sightline to both exits. The waitress was a woman in her 60s with the specific brand of unshockable patience that comes from 30 years of night shifts, and when I sat down in my biohazard remediation jacket with no shoes and a cracked phone and asked for coffee and an outlet, she brought both without a single question. I could have wept from gratitude. I nearly did. I sat there for a moment with both hands wrapped around the mug and let myself feel for exactly 60 seconds everything I had been refusing to feel since the elevator doors had closed in that building on Federal Plaza. Seraphina. Her voice fierce and absolutely certain, shouting my name one final time. The sound of it, the particular quality of it, the way it had not been frightened at all. I pressed my lips together so hard they ached. Then I opened my phone and I went to work. The first call was to a number I had memorized 3 years ago from a business card I had never expected to need. Special Agent Silas Grant, FBI Counterintelligence Division, New York Field Office. The same building I had just exited through a service corridor in a hazmat suit, which had a certain irony I was too tired to fully appreciate. He answered on the second ring, which told me Valerie had already called him. "Ms. Thorne," he said. His voice was low and careful and completely alert, the voice of someone who had not been sleeping. "I've been expecting you." "How much did Valerie tell you?" I asked. "Enough." A pause. "I need the evidence files. Everything you photographed. I'm sending them now." I opened the photo gallery and began transferring files to the encrypted channel Valerie had pre-established on the phone. 47 photographs, every page of the gray ledger decoded into plain language annotations I had added in the elevator during the descent. "There's a memory card too. It's still in the office, we didn't get it out, but the ledger is complete and the cipher key is in the last file I'm sending." "The warrant is being drafted," Agent Grant said. "I need 24 hours. "You have 8, I said. "The Digital Security Operations Center inauguration ceremony starts at noon today. Julian Sterling is the keynote presenter. Marcus Sterling will be in the VIP section. After noon, the entire evidence set goes public through channels I've already arranged, and if you're not in that building with a federal warrant in hand, you are going to spend the rest of your career explaining to a congressional oversight committee why you waited." Silence on the line. "Then I'll make some calls." "Please do," I said and ended it. The second call was to Robert Walsh at the New York Times, who I had researched 3 weeks ago for entirely different professional reasons. and whose personal cell number was listed in the Times editorial directory if you knew where to look. He answered on the fourth ring, groggy and irritated, and was neither groggy nor irritated approximately 45 seconds into my explanation. "You're telling me," he said, and I could hear him sitting upright, hear the creak of a chair, hear the sound of a man coming fully and rapidly awake, that the deputy director of the FBI has been running a murder-for-hire operation inside his own agency for 6 years. "I'm telling you that, and considerably more," I said. "I'm offering you a simultaneous exclusive live stream from inside the Meridian Center, beginning at 11:58 this morning, 2 minutes before it starts. Everything goes live to every platform at the same moment. It cannot be pulled. It cannot be stopped. It cannot be buried by anyone with a government title and a phone." A long pause. "I need credentials for the venue." "You're already credentialed. You're Robert Walsh of the Times. Call their press office and request technical assistant registration for a second camera operator. The name is Diana Brooks." I had chosen my mother's first name because I needed something I would answer to instinctively. "She'll be there." Another pause. "I need to see the evidence before I agree to this." "Check your encrypted inbox in 10 minutes, I said. I sent him the files, drank half my coffee, and moved to the next task. The Global Defense Solutions System, Julian's own creation. The network that had been scanning my face on cameras across the northeastern seaboard since yesterday morning ran on a server architecture I had spent 3 hours studying from documentation Julian had left carelessly accessible on our home network. He had been proud of it. He had wanted me to understand how comprehensive it was. Valerie's server access codes opened the administrative backend. It took me 40 minutes to locate the threat classification module and another 20 to understand Julian's own registration logic well enough to reverse it. The system classified individuals based on a threat matrix, behavioral data, financial patterns, biometric flags. I had spent 8 years building authentication algorithms. Julian's threat matrix was at its core the same structure as a provenance verification system. Different vocabulary, identical bones. I registered Julian Elias Sterling as a Category 1 physical threat against a protected witness currently under federal counterintelligence observation. His own face would now trigger his own network's highest priority alert in any venue where Global Defense had deployment contracts. The Meridian Center had a Global Defense security contract. I had found that in the sponsorship documents on the event's public website. I allowed myself one single moment of something that felt distantly like satisfaction. Then I opened the message application and typed the same text to 5 different numbers that Serafina had given me over the past 24 hours. 5 women in 5 different states, living under 5 different names, waiting for a day they had been told might never come. "It ends today. Meridian Center, New York, noon. Come as yourself. Bring anything you kept. I will be there." I hit send on all 5 simultaneously. Then I called the nearest 24-hour print shop, gave them the file upload link, and ordered 5 complete sets of the gray ledger photographs printed full-size in color, bound and tabbed. I paid with the emergency cash I had found after 20 minutes of desperate searching in the lining of the equipment case Valerie had prepared. $1,200, exact. She had thought of everything. I sat back in the booth when it was done and looked at the phone screen. A message from Agent Grant had arrived while I was printing. 4 words. "Warrant drafted, stand by." Outside the diner window, the sky over Queens was turning the particular gray-pink of early morning, the color of something ending and something else beginning simultaneously, if you were in the right frame of mind to read it that way. I finished my coffee. Then I put on the hazmat jacket, picked up my evidence folders, and walked out into the morning to end this. The Meridian Center was exactly the kind of building that Julian Sterling would have chosen for his defining moment. It occupied a full city block in Midtown Manhattan, all black glass and polished steel, the kind of architecture that communicates power not by being beautiful, but by being undeniable. Press vans lined the street outside. Camera crews jostled on the sidewalk. A red carpet, an actual red carpet, had been laid from the entrance doors to the street, flanked by retractable barriers and security personnel with earpieces and the particular practiced blankness of people paid to look intimidating. The banner above the entrance read, "Global Defense Solutions presents the Guardian securing the future today." Julian's name was printed below it in letters 2 feet high. I stood across the street for 30 seconds and looked at it. Then I put on my press badge, Diana Brooks' New York Times technical crew, straightened the jacket Robert Walsh had brought me in a bag outside the print shop an hour ago, and crossed. Walsh met me at the credential checkpoint, a tall man with a journalist's permanently skeptical expression and ink-stained fingers, who looked at me with the particular focus of someone who has spent 30 years covering stories that people with power desperately wanted buried. "Files checked out," he said quietly, falling into step beside me as we moved through the press entrance. "Every notation. I had our financial forensics editor look at the project's 7K13 budget flows at 6 this morning." He paused. "Brianna, this is the largest domestic corruption story since—" "I know what it is," I said. "Is your stream configured?" 20 platforms. Goes live at 11:58, 2 minutes before the keynote. Cannot be pulled, cannot be geo-blocked, cannot be taken down without triggering automatic mirror uploads to 40 secondary servers." He glanced at me sideways. "Your technical person is extraordinary." "Her name is Valerie," I said. "Remember it." Inside the Meridian Center's main hall was vast enough to make the air feel different, the particular quality of space that exists in venues designed to make individuals feel small in the presence of institutional power. A domed ceiling soared overhead, lined with the projection infrastructure for the holographic display system Julian's company had installed for the event. The lighting was warm and precise. Every surface gleamed. And the room was full, standing room full with every seat taken, and press crews lining the walls 3 deep. Government officials in carefully tailored suits. Technology executives, military contractors, foreign dignitaries in diplomatic dress. I counted 4 languages in the first 60 seconds of walking through the crowd. I found Thomas Reed at the technical director's station near the right wing of the stage, a compact man in a headset surrounded by monitors, looking like someone who had not slept and was pretending with great effort that this was normal. When he saw me, he flinched, and then composed himself, and then leaned toward me without making eye contact. "It's done," he said under his breath. "The primary feed override is mapped to your upload key. Whenever you trigger it, everything on those screens—" He gestured without pointing a tiny movement toward the massive curved display surfaces behind the stage. "Switches to your content. I cannot stop it once it starts, and I cannot be the person who started it." "You didn't," I said. "You have no idea what's about to happen. You are making a routine adjustment to the display calibration." He exhaled. "Thank you." "Thank Valerie," I said, and moved away. I took my position against the right side wall 40 feet from the press pool with a direct sightline to the stage and both primary exits. Walsh was 15 feet behind me, his camera operator positioned and running. The phone was in my hand with the upload trigger 3 taps away. Tap confirm send. That was all it would take, 3 taps. The lights shifted. A smooth professional voice announced the program's beginning. The crowd settled. Applause rippled from the VIP section as the official party filed onto the stage. Regional directors, government liaisons, 2 members of Congress, and took their seats at the long table behind the podium. I found Marcus Sterling in the 3rd seat from the right. Silver-haired and immaculate in a dark suit, he surveyed the room with the comfortable authority of a man who has spent decades ensuring that the rooms he walks into belong to him. He did not look like a man with anything to fear. He looked like a man accepting an ovation before it had started. Then Julian walked out. The applause was immediate and genuine. He crossed the stage with his particular ease, unhurried, confident, perfectly calibrated, and the crowd responded to it the way crowds always responded to Julian Sterling. They leaned forward slightly. They smiled without knowing why. He had that quality, that specific magnetic competence that made rooms want to trust him. I had wanted to trust him. I had trusted him with everything I had. My jaw tightened until it ached. He reached the podium and looked out at the room, and for one terrible second his eyes moved to the right side wall where I was standing, and I stopped breathing completely. But his gaze passed over me without stopping, moving on to the press pool, to the VIP section, to the back of the room. He had not recognized me. The shorter hair, the different jacket, the press badge, the simple fact that I was the last person he expected to see standing in this building. It was enough. Good morning, Julian said into the microphone, and his voice filled the room with the same warmth it had filled every room I had ever sat in with him. My stomach turned. Today marks something I have been working toward for 6 years. Today we stop talking about public safety and start delivering it. Applause. The Guardian system, he continued moving around the podium with practiced ease, represents the most comprehensive integrated security network ever deployed in the private sector. Facial recognition, behavioral analysis, financial threat, mapping real-time law enforcement coordination across 172 partner agencies. He paused, letting the scale of it land. This system is the eyes of justice. Its light reaches everywhere. And in its light, no criminal, no matter how powerful, no matter how well connected, no matter how long they have operated in the dark, can remain hidden. The room erupted. Julian smiled and raised one hand toward the display surface behind him. Let me show you what justice looks like, he said, and pressed the activation control on the podium panel. The holographic displays behind him flickered to life, brilliant and enormous, filling the domed space above the stage with light. And then they glitched. A single hard stutter, the image, destabilizing, fragmenting, rebuilding itself into something different. Julian looked over his shoulder at the display, and the first real uncertainty I had ever seen on his face crossed it like a shadow. I tapped the screen, once, confirmed, send. The screens went dark for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds of complete, confused silence in a room of 400 people. Every eye tilted upward at the massive curved display surfaces where Julian's presentation had been, where now there was nothing but black. Then the text appeared. White letters on gray, filling the entire dome above the stage from edge to edge, large enough to be read from every seat in the building. Project 7K13, the Sterling Ledger. Evidence of systematic murder, financial fraud, and corruption at the federal level. The silence lasted another 2 seconds, then the room broke open. Julian spun toward the display surface, and the expression on his face in that moment was the only honest thing I had ever seen from him. Raw, unguarded shock, the face of a man watching the architecture of 6 years collapse in real time. He lunged for the podium control panel and hammered at the override sequence. Nothing changed. He tried again. The screens did not respond. Shut it down, he said to Thomas Reed loudly enough that the front rows heard it. Shut the system down right now. Thomas Reed spread his hands and said with a steadiness that I deeply respected, Sir, I'm locked out of the primary feed. I don't have override access. Then get someone who does. But the screen had moved on. The liquidation list appeared next, filling the left half of the display surface. 10 names in 2 columns, clean and simple, each followed by a date of marriage, a date of death, and a method notation now rendered in plain English. Succinylcholine, xenon gas, insulin. Each name with a case number drawn directly from Marcus Sterling's own filing system, in his own handwriting now blown up to 2 feet tall above the heads of 2 United States congresspeople who were reading it with the expressions of people watching the ground open beneath them. From somewhere in the middle of the hall, a woman's voice said very clearly, "Oh my God." The right half of this display is filled with video. It was not long, perhaps 40 seconds of footage shot from a fixed ceiling angle in what was clearly a hotel room. The image quality good enough to see faces and hands, and the particular deliberate motion of someone who knows exactly what he is doing, and is doing it without hesitation. Julian Sterling, younger by 5 years, in a room that was not his, a ventilation access panel open in the wall, a small pressurized canister. The entire room watched. Nobody spoke. Not one person in 400 spoke for the full duration of that footage, and in that silence, Julian's career and freedom and future dissolved, as completely and irreversibly as if they had never existed. Then everyone spoke at once. The sound was tremendous. Hundreds of voices erupting simultaneously, chairs scraping, someone crying out. Press cameras swinging toward the stage with the sudden, synchronized urgency of trained journalists recognizing a historic moment. Robert Walsh's voice rose clearly above the general roar from his position near the right wall, calm and authoritative, narrating directly to his live stream camera, with the practiced confidence of a man who has broken important stories before and understands that the most powerful thing he can do right now is simply describe exactly what is happening. The screens shifted again. Project 7, K13's financial architecture spread across the full display surface, a diagram of extraordinary clarity. Every shell company, every routing number, every inflated contract value, every final deposit account laid out in the visual language of forensic accounting. $5 billion. The number sat in the center of the diagram in red, surrounded by branching lines like an arterial system, each branch terminating in an account that led ultimately to the same two beneficial owners. Julian Sterling, Marcus Sterling. I watched Marcus from across the room. He had risen from his seat in the VIP section at some point during the video. I had not seen exactly when, and was now standing at the edge of the VIP area, with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapidly into it, his free hand raised to signal his personal security detail. 3 men in dark suits were moving toward him from different directions, but there were other men moving faster. Agent Silas Grant had not been visible to me before that moment. He materialized from the left entrance corridor, with 4 other individuals in the particular dark jackets that mean one specific thing, and they cut through the crowd with a directness that parted it automatically. And the 3 men Marcus had signaled took one look at what was coming and stopped moving entirely. Marcus's phone came down from his ear. On the screen above him, his own handwritten notation stared back from the liquidation list in the penmanship his secretary had watched him practice for 15 years. Julian saw Agent Grant. He saw the federal jackets. He saw his father standing motionless in the VIP section, with the expression of a man who has just understood that a game he believed he was winning ended 3 moves ago. And Julian Sterling, who had never once panicked in front of me, panicked. His hand went to his jacket. "Julian, don't," I said loudly, because I was already moving toward the stage, already pushing through the crowd, already thinking 3 steps ahead the way I should have been thinking from the very first night he walked into my life. He pulled a weapon from his shoulder holster and raised it, and 400 people screamed at once, and the room became pure chaos, bodies dropping behind seats, press cameras swinging wildly, Walsh's voice cutting sharply through his live stream narration to describe what was happening with remarkable composure. Julian's arm swept the room, pointing at journalists, at officials, at Agent Grant's approaching team searching for me among the crowd. "Where is she?" His voice had shed every layer of charm and warmth and careful calibration. What was underneath was cold and flat and frightened and furious all at once. "Where is she?" "Right here," I said. I was 15 feet from the stage. He found me immediately, and the weapon came around to point directly at me, and I looked at the muzzle of it and felt something I had not expected. Not fear, not exactly, but a strange crystalline calm, the calm of someone who has already used everything she has and placed it entirely beyond his reach. "It's too late, Julian," I said. "It's been live for 11 minutes. There is no version of this that ends well for you." "Shut up," he said, and his hand was shaking, and the shake was the most honest thing I had ever seen from him. Then from Julian's own jacket pocket, his phone began to emit a rapid, escalating alert tone, the Priority 1 threat notification from his own global defense system. Red targeting lights appeared on his chest. 3 of them, small and precise and absolutely steady. The Global Defense Laser Tracking System, installed by Julian's own company in the Meridian Center's security infrastructure, had identified a Category 1 threat in the venue. It had identified Julian Sterling. Julian's gun hand was shaking. 3 red laser pointers held perfectly still on his chest, unwavering, because laser tracking systems do not share the neurological disadvantages of human hands. His own phone was screaming the Priority 1 alert in his jacket pocket. His own system had identified him as the most dangerous individual in the building, and his own system was correct. Agent Grant's team had stopped advancing. They held their positions spread across 3 approach angles, hands visible, waiting. The room was in controlled pandemonium, the particular chaos of a crowd that cannot leave and cannot look away, 400 people pressed between terror and the overwhelming human compulsion to witness something historic. Julian's eyes were on me, only on me. "Call it off," he said. His voice was stripped to its foundation, no warmth, no performance, no architecture of charm. Just the raw voice of a man who has run out of moves and knows it and is not yet willing to accept it. "Call the system off, and I walk out of here, and this ends without anyone getting hurt." It already hurt people, I said. It hurt 10 of them. Some of them are in this room. He stared at me. Some of them, I said again, are in this room right now. And that was when the first woman stood up. She rose from a seat in the center section. Seventh row, a woman in her early 30s in a dark blazer, her hair cut short, her posture absolutely straight. She did not look like someone who had spent 14 months living under a false name in Phoenix, Arizona. She looked like someone who had been waiting for this exact moment and had dressed for it accordingly. "My name is Chloe Miller," she said loudly and clearly into a room that was already beginning to understand what was happening and falling silent in response to it. "I am Julian Sterling's second wife. On the 14th of September 2 years ago, he pushed me off a sailing catamaran in the Aegean Sea at approximately 2 in the morning. He told the Greek Coast Guard I had gone overboard during rough weather. He filed my death certificate 11 days later." She paused and her voice did not waver. "I am not dead. I am standing in this room, and I want every person watching this live stream to see my face." She turned toward the nearest press camera and held the eye of it for a full 3 seconds. The second woman stood, left side of the room near the wall. Grace Montgomery, 32 years old, who had survived xenon gas exposure in a sealed apartment in Boston 18 months ago. She pulled back the collar of her shirt to show the chemical scarring along the left side of her neck, a burn pattern that no physician would mistake for anything accidental. She did not speak immediately. She simply stood and let the cameras find her because some evidence requires no narration. "His name was on the lease," she said then. "He had a key. The gas company confirmed the line had been manually compromised from inside the apartment." Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her lips together and steadied it. "I almost died alone in a room that smelled like nothing because xenon has no odor. I want that in the record." The third woman, fourth, fifth, each one rising from a different quadrant of the room, each one standing with the particular stillness of someone who has been invisible for a very long time and is choosing in this moment to be entirely visible. They gave their names clearly. Rebecca Hartman, Jennifer Walsh. "No relation to Robert," she clarified, which pulled a sound from the crowd that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. Laura Simmons, each of them alive, each of them documented in Marcus Sterling's ledger as closed cases, each of them standing in a room where that ledger was currently projected at 2 feet tall on the walls. Julian watched them stand, one by one by one by one by one. Something happened to his face that I had no name for. It was not remorse. I did not believe Julian Sterling was capable of remorse in any meaningful sense. It was something more mechanical. The face of a system encountering an input it was not designed to process. His weapon hand dropped 6 inches. The screens shifted one final time. The photographs my mother had taken on a Connecticut front porch appeared 3 men in dark suits, close-up shots of their identification wallets, the black Suburban with its plates visible. Below the photographs in the caption, Walsh's team had added from my annotation files, private operators employed by Deputy Director Marcus Sterling. Credentials confirmed fraudulent by FBI Forensic Document Unit. Marcus Sterling made a sound I heard clearly from across the room. A single compressed sound, the sound of a man who has just watched the last supporting wall go. Agent Grant said something into his radio. "Julian." I took 3 steps toward the stage. My voice carried the way voices carry in rooms that have gone very quiet. "This is over. Every person in this room has seen it. Every person watching this stream, and there are currently 1.4 million of them Robert just told me has seen it. There is no version of this in which you walk out of here free." I stopped, looked at him directly. "Put the weapon down." "You have no idea," he said, "what you have done." "I know exactly what I've done," I said. "I've done what your system promised to do and never intended to. I've found the criminal." I looked at the 3 red laser points on his chest. "You built this to find people like you, Julian. The only thing you got wrong was believing it would never actually work." For one long moment, Julian Sterling looked at me across the distance of the stage and the crowd and everything that had happened between the night we met and this morning, and I looked back at him, and I did not look away. Then the tactical response team came through 3 doors simultaneously. Julian raised the weapon one final time, not at me, not at Agent Grant, but upward, a wild gesture of pure futile rage, and the global defense system responded to the motion exactly as it had been programmed to respond to threatening behavior from a Category 1 target. Every light in the room went red. The tactical team moved, and Julian Sterling, CEO of Global Defense Solutions, creator of a system designed to eliminate threats to public safety, became the first person that system had ever successfully stopped. It took 11 minutes to secure the room. I know because I counted. Standing against the right side wall with my back pressed flat against it, and the evidence folders clutched to my chest, I counted every minute of it, the tactical team moving through the crowd in organized waves, the shouting of commands, the particular authoritative clarity of federal law enforcement vocabulary, cutting through the ambient chaos of 400 frightened and astonished people. Julian went down on the stage. He did not go quietly. He wrenched sideways when the first agent reached him, knocked a podium monitor to the floor, shouted something at Agent Grant that I could not hear over the crowd noise, and chose not to try to hear. Two agents brought him to the stage floor with a controlled efficiency that brooked no argument, and when they pulled his arms behind him and the handcuffs clicked into place, the sound of it cut through the noise in the room with startling clarity. Like a period at the end of a very long sentence, Robert Walsh narrated every second of it into his camera without stopping once. Marcus Sterling did not struggle. That was the thing I remembered afterward, the detail that stayed with me longest. He simply stood in the VIP section as Agent Grant's team approached him, and he straightened his jacket slowly, deliberately, a gesture of pure reflex from a man whose entire life had been constructed around the appearance of dignity. An agent asked him to place his hands behind his back. Marcus looked at the agent for a long moment, the look of a man taking inventory of everything he had ever held and finding it gone, and then he complied. As they walked him past the press pool, Robert Walsh asked him one question. Deputy Director Sterling, do you have a statement regarding the contents of Project 7K13 KK? Marcus Sterling looked directly into the camera. He opened his mouth, then he closed it. And for the first time in what I imagined was decades, Marcus Sterling had absolutely nothing to say. They walked him out through the left entrance, and he did not look back, and the room watched him go, in a silence that felt like the collective exhale of something that had been held for a very long time. I was still standing against the wall when Chloe Miller found me. I recognized her from Seraphina's wall, the photograph in the center of the second row. The one with the bright eyes, and the posture of someone carrying more than their share, and not complaining about it. In person, she was smaller than I expected, and younger looking. And when she stopped in front of me, her expression was so complicated, I could not have named all of what was in it. You're Brianna, she said. Yes, Seraphina told me about you. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were full and shining. She said you were the right one. She said she knew from the moment she saw you across that restaurant that you were smart enough to survive him. A tear broke free, and she pressed the back of her hand against her cheek hard. She was right. Something came loose in my chest. I reached out and took Chloe's hand with both of mine and held it, and she gripped back, and we stood there in the middle of a room full of federal agents and journalists and 400 witnesses to the end of Julian Sterling's operation, and I said, "She's going to be all right. I'm going to make sure of it." Chloe nodded. She could not speak for a moment. Then she pulled herself together with a visible effort and said, "She always said she was fine. Every Sunday at 8 a.m. for 11 months she called me and said she was fine." She laughed a wet and broken sound. "She is the least fine person I have ever met, and also the bravest." Both things I said can be completely true. Agent Grant reached me 40 minutes later when the room had thinned and the remaining press were conducting interviews with the surviving witnesses, and Walsh's live stream had crossed 3 million concurrent viewers. He was a compact man with gray at his temples, and the particular quality of someone who has spent a career dealing with the worst things human beings do to each other, and has not been broken by it, only worn to a specific density. He held out his hand and I shook it. "The accounts," he said, "will be fully restored within 48 hours. The joint account suspension request has been voided." The Art Verify complaint has been flagged as fraudulent, and your credentials have been reinstated effective immediately. The Society has already issued a retraction. He paused. The individuals who visited your parents in Connecticut, 3 of Marcus Sterling's contract operators, are currently being processed. Your mother's photographs were extremely helpful. She took 8 years of patient observation from me, I said. The apple doesn't fall far. Your father is stable, Grant said. He was moved out of intensive care this morning. His physician says the prognosis is very good. I pressed my hand flat against my sternum and breathed through my nose. I would not cry in front of a federal agent. I had made this decision and I was committed to it. Thank you, I said. My voice only broke slightly. There's one more thing, he said, and his expression shifted into something that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. Serafina Vance. She was being held in a private facility under a fraudulent federal detention order signed by Marcus Sterling. The order was voided the moment his arrest was confirmed. He checked his watch. She was released approximately 20 minutes ago. I did not manage to not cry after all. I found a chair near the right side wall and sat in it, and pressed both hands over my face, and cried, not quietly, not gracefully, not in the contained and manageable way I had been managing everything for the past 36 hours, but fully and messily, and with total disregard for the federal agents and journalists who were almost certainly observing this. I cried for Serafina standing in that elevator corridor shouting my name. I cried for my father in a hospital bed in Hartford. I cried for my grandfather's algorithm, and the marriage that was never a marriage, and the wine glass that I had not touched on a December night in Newport that had saved my life. I cried for every woman whose photograph hung on the wall of a Bronx apartment, and for the ones who were alive and standing in this building, and for the ones who were not. I cried until it was finished. Then I wiped my face, straightened my jacket, and stood up. Walsh was waiting near the exit. He lowered his camera when he saw my face and said with a journalist's direct kindness, "It's going to be the most watched piece of footage since the moon landing." "Good," I said. "Make sure Valerie Jenkins is named in every piece you write. Make sure people know her name." "Already in the first draft," he said. I left the Meridian Center at 2:17 in the afternoon into December sunlight that was thin and cold and absolutely real, and I stood on the sidewalk and breathed it in for a long moment before I moved. 2 weeks later, I went back to my grandfather's collection. I went alone to the storage facility in Connecticut, where 43 post-war European works lived, in climate-controlled rooms, each one authenticated by my grandfather, and then eventually by me. I walked through them slowly, looking at each one with the particular attention I had been trained to give, and in the 7th room, in the lower right corner of a modest landscape by a minor Dutch painter that everyone had always overlooked, I found it, embedded in the paint layer itself. A sequence of notations in a cipher I recognized immediately because I had been reading its variations my entire professional life. My grandfather had built his authentication algorithm from the same bones. I sat down on the floor of that climate-controlled room and decoded it by hand on a legal pad, and when I was finished, I looked at what I had written for a long time. Then I called Agent Grant. Then I called my mother. Then I drove to the hospital in Hartford, walked into my father's room and sat beside his bed and held his hand, and he opened his eyes and looked at me and said, "There she is," in the voice of a man who had never once in my entire life stopped believing I would figure it out. I squeezed his hand and said softly, so only he could hear it, "Here I am, Dad. Here I am." Sitting by my father's hospital bed, I realized that truth is often more brutal than any forged painting. I once believed in a perfect love only to nearly vanish in a calculated scheme of family betrayal. If God gave us instincts, it was so we could protect ourselves before it's too late. Don't be like me. Don't let innocence and blind trust cloud your judgment, because sometimes the person pouring your wine is the one counting down your final days. The price of family betrayal is always steep, but the cost of awakening is even higher. My view is simple: money can be recovered, and a reputation can be rebuilt. But trust once shattered is nothing more than jagged shards of glass. I chose the path of family revenge not out of pure hatred, but to reclaim justice for the women who fell in silence. A true family revenge isn't just about putting a villain behind bars. It's about seizing back control of your own life. The agony of this family betrayal taught me that the ultimate protection doesn't lie in algorithms, but in vigilance. Always keep an escape route for yourself, because in this battle of family revenge, the only one who wins is the one who survives. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. What do you think about Brianna's choice? Please leave a comment, share, and subscribe to the channel to never miss the next thrilling and insightful stories. A brief warning. The following stories contain certain fictional elements crafted for educational purposes and social awareness. If this content does not align with your personal philosophy, feel free to step away and choose a different journey that suits you better. Your presence here is always deeply valued.
Some days feel off, like I'm standing but still falling. A little pain, a little tired, and no one to tell it all to. There are days that feel unsteady, like I'm drifting out of place. Every step just feels so heavy, with a smile I have to fake. A little hurt I keep inside me, a little weight I always hide, and 1,000 quiet worries I've been holding deep inside. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. I keep walking through the silence like it's all I've ever known. Every crowded room reminds me how it feels to be alone. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. Maybe one day I'll be stronger, maybe I'll learn how to speak, but for now I keep it buried in the parts of me too weak. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. Don't pity me. My heart doesn't need your mercy. I can still stand on my own. I was broken by your leaving, fell deeper than I thought I would, but pain has taught me how to heal now and survive what once I couldn't. You don't have to look back sadly, don't reach out with guilty hands. What you shattered made me stronger. Now I rise where I once collapsed. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow, I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling, I'll learn to breathe again. I once begged for your affection, now I've learned my worth in scars. And the man you left in pieces found his own way through the dark. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow, I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling, I'll learn to breathe again. So keep your sympathy behind you, I don't need what's left undone. Sometimes losing who once broke you is how healing has begun. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow, I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling, I'll rise alone again. I'll rise alone